Okay, I want you to forget everything you think you know about history. We're about to rewind the clock, and I don't mean by a few centuries, I mean by millions of years. This is the epic journey of how our ancestors went from just surviving on the savannah to literally building the foundations of the world we live in right now. This is the story of prehistory.
So, what even is prehistory? Well, to put it simply, it's the entire human saga before we figured out how to write any of it down. You know, it starts with the very first human ancestor who thought, hey, I can use this rock as a tool. And it ends the exact moment someone managed to scratch a symbol onto a clay tablet. It is, without a doubt, the longest and most mysterious chapter in our entire story.
All right, here's how we're going to piece this ancient puzzle together. First, we need to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this time. Then, we'll dive into what life was like as a hunter-gatherer. After that, we'll witness the single biggest game changer in human history, see how that led to a totally new world, and finally, watch as this entire era comes to a close with the dawn of history itself.
So first up, let's get some perspective. We're about to dive into a period of time that is so mind-bogglingly vast, it's almost impossible for us to really grasp. This is the era that shaped our bodies, our brains, and our most basic instincts, all before a single word was ever written down. Just look at this timeline. The scale is absolutely staggering. The Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, is this enormous 2.5 million year block of time. And the Neolithic, the Middle Ages, and all of recorded history, they're just that tiny little sliver at the very, very end. Really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? So, what was life actually like during this immense period? Well, welcome to the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, because for the vast, vast majority of our time on Earth, this was our reality. And when I say vast, I'm not kidding. Over 99% of our entire existence as a species was spent in the Paleolithic. Just let that sink in for a second. Pretty much everything we call history, empires, philosophies, smartphones, all of that is crammed into less than 1% of our time on this planet. So what did this 99% actually look like? Well, life was a constant search for food. Imagine living in a small, nomadic group, always on the move, following the great herds and the rhythm of the seasons. Your home was a cave, or maybe just a simple camp under the stars. Your tech was whatever you could chip from stone and bone. And, most importantly, you had fire, which was probably the single biggest leap forward until writing came along. And you know what? This tough, simple lifestyle was incredibly successful. I mean, starting out in Africa, early humans, including our own species, Homo sapiens, spread out and managed to colonize every corner of the globe. And for a long time, we weren't even alone. We shared the planet with other human species, like the Neanderthals over in Europe. So this brings up a really fascinating question. If this hunter-gatherer model worked so well for so incredibly long, what in the world could be powerful enough to completely upend it and change human destiny forever? Well, the answer is a revolution. But not a political one with armies and kings. No, this was something much, much deeper. This is the story of the Neolithic shift, the single most important transformation our species has ever undergone. And the trigger, it wasn't some brilliant new idea or a clever invention. It was the planet itself. Around 10,000 BC, the last ice age finally came to an end. The world's climate changed, and it changed dramatically. For the nomadic hunters who had perfected survival in that old, icy world, this was a full-blown catastrophe.
You see, as the planet warmed up, the giant animals that humans depended on, the mammoths, the giant sloths, the saber-toothed cats, they started to die out. Familiar hunting grounds completely transformed, and some regions just turned into desert. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which had been stable for millions of years, was suddenly facing a crisis. The choice was simple: adapt or disappear.
And the change this forced on us was absolute. I mean, just look at the shifts here. You go from constantly moving to staying in one place, from chasing your food to growing it yourself. Even the tools changed, becoming more refined, more polished for all these new jobs. We literally moved out of the caves and into the very first permanent villages. This wasn't just a new strategy, it was a completely new way of being human. So here's the really important part. The Neolithic Revolution wasn't actually about new stone tools. It was about a radical new idea. An idea probably born from sheer desperation. What if we stopped chasing our food and started making it instead? This was the dawn of agriculture and animal herding, and it would change absolutely everything.
So how did this one single idea build the world we know today? Well, because once you stop moving and start farming, you set off this incredible chain reaction of changes that leads, step by logical step, directly to the complex societies we all live in today.
And it all started pretty small, in a region we now call the Fertile Crescent. Humans there learned to domesticate animals that were, let's face it, a lot easier to manage than a woolly mammoth, animals like goats, sheep, and pigs. At the same time, they figured out how to cultivate the seeds of wild grasses, creating the world's first crops of wheat and barley.
And this is where the dominoes start to fall. For the first time ever, you have a food surplus, more food than you can eat in one day. That surplus means you can store it, which lets you settle down and build permanent villages. But as soon as you have villages and stored food, you have property. And property needs to be protected, which starts to create social hierarchies, leaders and followers. And eventually that leads to the first states and armies, all to protect that original surplus of grain.
So the fundamental shift here was from reacting to nature to trying to control it. And yeah, producing our own food was a massive advantage, but it also created a whole new set of problems we'd never faced before. Like, what do you do if the rains don't come? How do you keep pests or your neighbors from stealing your stored grain?
Which brings us to the final, crucial piece of this whole puzzle. Just imagine you're the leader of one of these early farming villages. You've got storehouses full of grain, herds of livestock, maybe some complicated trade deals going on. How on earth do you keep track of all of that?
The answer to that very practical problem required one last, monumental invention. An invention so powerful that it would bring the entire 2.5 million year era of prehistory to a definitive, sudden close.
And what's so fascinating is that writing wasn't invented for poetry or for telling grand stories. It was invented for accounting. Seriously, the early civilizations in Mesopotamia just needed a reliable way to track their goods. How many bushels of barley are in that storeroom? How many goats do we owe that other village? It was born from the simple, practical need to manage data.
The very first system they came up with was called cuneiform. They take a stylus and press these little wedge-shaped marks into tablets of wet clay. Each little symbol represented an item, a bundle of grain, a head of livestock, a jar of oil. Then they'd bake the tablet, and boom, you have a permanent record. It was, for all intents and purposes, humanity's very first hard drive.
And with that simple, practical act of recording information, everything changes. For the first time, people can pass down complex knowledge across generations without it getting lost or twisted in the telling. The age of myth and legend is ending. The age of history has finally begun.
There's no doubt the Neolithic Revolution gave us cities, technology, pretty much everything we call civilization. It was a massive success story. But it's worth asking, when we traded the freedom and uncertainty of the hunt for the repetitive toil of the farm, what did we gain, and what parts of ourselves might we have left behind for good?